There we go. All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate, and I'm responsible for all things marketing here at the Coral Reef Alliance. I am so excited for each and every one of you to hear from our special guest, Sean Vela. And before we say hello, let me give you some important context. This year, BBC Storyworks launched a new series of mini documentaries called Blue Horizons. It's a collection of stories from those who are working towards a better future for our oceans. And we're honored to be one of those stories. Earlier this year, Sean and his team traveled to Roatan, Honduras, and documented our work along with local partners and community members. And he created a beautiful mini documentary for our organization for the new BBC Storyworks series. So let's take a moment to watch the film, and then we'll get to know Sean and hear from him a lot more.
I am in line to many generations of island-born citizens. My personal connection to the ocean and the reef is something that I was born into.
Ever since I was little, I would go swimming in the ocean. As a little kid, my first recollection is this little fish swimming around me and basically guiding me to that reef. It just blows your mind. We have to protect it.
I was born and raised in Roatan. People come here from all over the world just to see that reef. Whatever we do on land, it's affecting the coral reef. And if we don't take care of the sewage in the ocean, that becomes a problem. We knew that we had to do something about it.
Roatan is home. I remember when I was real young, we used the ocean to take care of everything. We had outhouses. I remember seeing the feces going by. Sometimes it would end up on the beach. It's not healthy having raw sewage just pumped into the ocean.
The moment I realized that I wanted to find a solution was after going on a dive and realizing that depletion was happening to this beautiful coral reef that we're so fortunate to live in. One of the things that we first did was getting everyone to realize the wastewater needed to be addressed immediately.
In 2013, we began marine water quality monitoring on the island of Roatan. What the data showed was that there was high contamination in the most populated areas around the island. Which makes sense, right? Because there's a lot of people living in one given area and there's not proper sewage treatment facilities, then all of that sewage will eventually make it to the ocean. It will kill the corals that live there, it will kill the fishes that live there. But we also need to think about our kids and ourselves because it can cause different diseases for humans. So after realizing the problem, it was clear that we needed sanitation infrastructure. That's when we started working with the local water board and Coral Reef Alliance.
This is headquarters for Water Association that does the freshwater as well as the Blackwater. The treatment plant was created, was built, was installed, and when Coral Reef Alliance came in, it gave us all the trust and the hope that we could continue. The next step was, how do we get rid of the Blackwater?
Although the sewage treatment plant in the community of West End was built in 2012, the data didn't indicate the benefits of it because all the homes were not connected to it. So that untreated sewage from all the homes was still leaching out into the ocean. People were reluctant at the beginning because they didn't really understood the importance of it. But no one said to them, hey, you're killing your livelihood, like you're killing your reef, like you're killing your culture. No one said that.
Hello, come in.
So what we did, we went house to house. And we used the data to teach people what is happening in their backyard. And people were just in awe, like they couldn't believe what was going on. And that's where, you know, knowledge really can change behavior.
People talk to each other within the communities. Once they realized that this was important to preserve the reef, you know, the economy of this island thrives on tourism, and the reef is a huge part of that.
Since this process has begun and all the homes have been connected to the sewage treatment plant, what we're seeing is amazing results. The water quality in West End has improved exponentially. And you can see that in the environment. Like you can smell it when you walk around the community.
Recently, we had a pod of dolphins come in to Half Moon Bay. So one of the dolphins could give birth to a baby. And my thought is that, you know what, we're doing something right.
West End has shown that a proper management system in terms of wastewater is possible, and it has to be replicated.
Being a part of this is taking me back to my father's advice, in which he said, you have to be part of the solution. If not, you become part of the problem.
All right. You know, I've seen this film a million times, and it still gives me so much appreciation for our field teams and our partners and the work they do, as well as hope for the future of coral reefs. So shout out to our teams on the ground and in the water. They truly are the heroes making our plans come to life. And Sean and his team did an incredible job of highlighting the impact of that work. So let's meet him. Hey, Sean, you're right here. Sean Vela is a 22-time Emmy award-winning producer, director of photography, cinematographer, and editor. His work has been streamed on some of the most popular platforms, including BBC, Disney+, ESPN, ESPN2, Amazon Prime Video, Entrepreneur Network, BT Sport, Fox, and more. Sorry, there are dogs here. He has worked on projects for brands like BBC Storyworks, Kayak, Invisalign, Legoland California Resort, Amazon, Sony Music, and more. He is the president and CEO of Vela Visuals, a full-service video production agency that helps organizations create documentaries, commercials, and TV shows. Sean is also the founder of Story Starter, a storytelling program designed to help organizations discover and tell their story. He's been in the industry since 2008 and created his first TV show for broadcast distribution at the age of 22. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Thanks for being here. It's such an honor to have you here because I had the pleasure of working with you earlier on this year, and now you get to share your experience with our audience. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. It's like literally the easiest thing I can do is sit here and talk to you guys, remembering that awesome trip, because I feel like we all learned so much about ourselves and the people of the island. So I'm super excited and ready to talk about anything you want.
Awesome. Yeah, I know everyone's super excited and has been patiently waiting to hear from you. So let's jump right in and set the stage. So we all know how impactful and important storytelling is, but take us deeper into why and kind of the details around that. How is it that stories can tap into places that inspire us to do good and even get involved in conservation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I need to give a little context, right? So my background, I had this phrase that I use to describe myself, and I call it like my two-word story, right? And it goes like, Sean Vela exists to help others and honor God by stewarding stories. And for me, the reason that is my own story for myself is because I feel like I come most alive when I'm stewarding stories or when I'm telling stories, specifically within the context of a documentary, but also just like in life. What are the stories that we're telling ourselves? What are the stories that my family is telling about who they are and what their purpose is? So I just want to kind of give the background context of, like, for me, storytelling is like a super huge component of my everyday life, because that's the lens that I look at life through. And I say all that to say that within this context, I really think that the real power of storytelling is that stories speak to our hearts. And, when we talk about movements and organizations, a lot of times we're thinking about like facts and figures and maybe statistics and technical things. And while I think all those are like super, super important, they may not necessarily resonate with us right away when we first hear them. But a good story, on the other hand, can take abstract thoughts and make it very personal to us. And so, to give you an example, using like this Blue Horizons film, I think that the story itself, when it didn't just present this issue of wastewater management as like a technical problem. The story we told was through the personal experience of these three women, and specifically one example of one of the women in the story. Her name was Giselle. She talked about having a deep connection to the ocean when she was a little girl, and swimming with the fish, and the fish would take her to the reef, and how that memory just impacted her so much of being able to grow up and see these fish, just swimming with them, and it gave her like a really deep, strong love for the ocean. And so that personal connection to the ocean is what I believe makes that issue of wastewater management more real, because it reflects. And I believe it reflects the humanity in those big abstract issues, like wastewater management. And, the reality is, I believe that, stories that reflect are stories that connect. And so when it comes to conservation specifically, I think that a story can put familiar faces to a cause or to a mission, right? And so in the Blue Horizons film, it showed how the untreated sewage was not just an environmental issue, but it was kind of like a potential public health crisis because of the sewage in the water where people may have wanted to swim. And so that was affecting the very people who lived on the island. So through their stories, the mission became more than just preserving the reef. It was about protecting their homes, protecting their livelihoods, and protecting their future. Because, like it said in the film, their island thrives off of tourism. And so I think when we share these kinds of stories, we're ultimately helping people see themselves as part of the solution. That's why I genuinely believe this idea of stories change people and people change the world, because when the right story is told to the right person at the right time, it has the potential to change the world for the better. And because it has the power to change the hearts and the minds of people, which again can ultimately give them an activation to do something about some of the problems that they're seeing.
Yeah, I love all of that. You know, it's really cool to picture storytelling as this, or telling stories as a broader set of tools for connection and change, especially in conservation and you know, creating change for the better. And so when it comes to this particular project, let's get more specific about your initial thoughts around this project. So before anything even started, kind of talk us through how you got to know it in the first place with all of those principles in mind around storytelling.
I love it. Yeah. So to give again a little background, so we work in, I guess, with BBC Storyworks, and so when we heard about the story at the point that it was, um, there's a producer at BBC Storyworks. Her name is Marette, and she is incredible. So she, did a lot of interviews and fleshed out a lot of the story before we, got to even see what it was. And so, but by the time we got the story, we were doing the Zoom calls, and obviously you were on some of the Zoom calls too. So we met the Coral team, and we're just collaborating. And what we initially heard about the story was it was a story that was about wastewater management, right? And so, which, to those who may not know, when you first hear that, like, it's a story about wastewater management, right? Like, it could sound maybe a little to that untrained ear, right? Like a little dry, maybe, or maybe too technical. But uh, when we arrive to Roatan, and you realize that the story is not just that, it's so much more, right? It's about the people and their connection to the ocean and their passion specifically to protect the coral reef, because it supports their way of life, and so you see that the approach becomes, it's not this daunting task of looking at wastewater management. It's just like, well, let's look at the people, right? And so I think that also, when you think about that, and you think about, at least from our perspective, how do we thinking about those things? How do we begin to tell that story? Right, becomes the question. And so, for me, one of the most important things when telling any kind of story like this in this context, especially when we're going to, outside of the country to tell some of these stories, is like, well, if it's about the people, we really want to be able to create an environment where people feel really, really comfortable being who they authentically are, because we don't want to get there and try and make people say stuff that they don't want to say or force anything. Like, we want to show what it's actually really like, right? And so that part of just that approach plays a huge part in every choice that we make, from when we get there to the crew and the people that we bring, and the team members that come on site. And again, shout out to some of the team members who may be on here right now. So like Alex, who's right in the picture there, amazing. And Jeff, Alex Pizarro, Jeff Autumn, these guys were the perfect fit for this particular job, not just because they're amazing cinematographers, photographers, and drone pilots, but because they have an uncanny ability to make people feel really comfortable and feel like they can be themselves on camera. Because, as you know, or as you may know, doing something like this, a lot of time when we tell these stories, we're talking and we're featuring people who may not have ever been in front of a camera before. So making people feel comfortable enough to be authentic is absolutely everything. And because, like I said, in the end of the day, it's the people of Roatan that end up truly shaping the story.
Yeah, I love that. And you said something a while back about holding it loosely. I really like that phrase. But yeah, it really is all about the people. And I think it's safe to say that the people of Roatan made it a lot easier to capture those stories. We're going to watch the behind the scenes film at the end. But as Jeff said in that film, everywhere you look, there's a story. So it's just incredible that you got to bring that team there and tell those stories and get to experience those stories. And I'm going to pause for a second on the team aspect. Jeff and Alex, if you're on, huge shout out and hello to both of you. You three are just some of the most talented, humble, and kind people I've ever met, especially in like the creative industry, because there's zero ego. It's incredible. It's impressive. So working with all three of you was just such a special experience. And I don't know which corner I'm in, but I put a little picture of me in there because I was so honored to have been able to contribute a little piece of the underwater part of the film. So again, thank you for having me there. But this is the team. This is kind of behind the scenes, and we'll see more later.
And I will say the underwater footage was incredible if anyone saw it. So you did a really great job.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, so when we talked last week, you mentioned something that I really appreciated. You said an organization isn't always the main character in stories like these. And that's a little counterintuitive. In my professional experience as a marketer, I tend to champion this idea a lot to people who don't see it that way at all. So for our audience here, break that down for us. Tell us a little bit more about the reasoning behind that and just kind of the nuances of that.
Right. And first of all, thanks so much for bringing it up, because it's actually like a super common conversation we have with a lot of projects, especially when we're, telling stories that involve really, really impactful organizations like Coral, right? And so, but when we think about storytelling, especially from the perspective of an organization, like one would think, right? One would think that like, okay, we're the organization, and the organization itself and all the great things that the organization has done and does should be like the main thing, right? We should be focusing on that and putting that out there. And not to say that that's not important at all, because it really is. I would say that it going that way might not necessarily be as impactful or powerful of an approach as it could be, specifically because like it actually ties to one of these storytelling principles that I have for myself. So like background a little bit here, I have a program called Story Starter, and where we help organizations tell stories to their audience and craft their stories. And one of the principles we have, I call it the secret of main characters. And so the secret of main characters, the idea is that sometimes in many great stories, the main character can be someone who may not be the most obvious choice from the organization. And for example, like in the Blue Horizons film, the Coral Reef Alliance plays like a super huge role and an incredibly important role in supporting the efforts in managing wastewater in Roatan. But when you experience it, like you don't feel like they're the main character. Instead, we're focused directly on Giselle, on Danny and Cynthia, and the women who are directly impacted and involved with this work. And so by making these women the central figures in the story, we allow the audience to see the issues through their eyes, which creates that deeper connection, to be able to feel what they feel and understand the problem in a much more personal way. And so the byproduct of that, though, to the benefit of the organization, is that those stories and those perspectives actually end up propping up the organization, right? They make the organization look incredible because those things are coming from the mouths of real people and not from the organization, right? So when we hear somebody tell us something that an organization does, we're more likely to trust that versus an organization coming to us and telling us how great they are, right? And not to say that we shouldn't do that, but it gives us a little bit more, like, for lack of a better word, like street cred, right? It gives us a little bit more street cred when we're having these conversations and we're telling these stories, because these are the real experiences that people have had. So when I say that an organization isn't the main character, it's about recognizing that the most powerful stories are the ones that focus on people and how their lives are being impacted by the work that's being done.
Yes. And I think after seeing the film, pretty sure everyone listening would agree that this approach works really well, and especially in drawing you into this story. And the characters are so strong. Each woman in the film has a world of stories, and to connect those with our cause creates that connection that you spoke of earlier. So, all right. So you planned things out, had Zoom meetings with the team and our film stars. You assembled the crew. Now it's time to get to Roatan. So how did your first impression or your first thoughts evolve? What was the experience like when you first arrived on the island? Just kind of first impressions of the airport, the drive across the island, the community, the people. Talk us through that.
Yeah. Well, I'll say like, I don't know how, I'm sure a lot of people have here been outside the country and been to other countries like this. And so in flying there, I was expecting it. And so I wasn't surprised, but like for people who haven't been there, it's a very small airport. And when you get off the plane, they actually roll up like the steps to you and you get off and go down the steps. You don't go like through a tunnel and do any of that stuff. So you get off the plane and you climb down the steps and you just see that the airport's very small, but you see the palm trees right away. And I remember, thinking like, okay, like this definitely has like a little bit of a third world vibe, which is not bad. It's incredible because that's what we're doing, right? And so, and we get out, we get our stuff, and like I said, if anyone's ever been to a third world or to outside the country in a country like this, not only the airport experiences like that, but once you get in a car and you start driving and you see the way that other people drive in those countries, it's very different than how we drive, right? And so I don't remember seeing any like, traffic signals. I'm sure there probably were, but I don't remember seeing any of them. I remember seeing people. I just remember being like, oh my gosh, where are we? What are we doing? Right. And so, but you see the houses you pass by and it's great. And then we pulled up to the area that we're going to be at, which is Half Moon Bay. And it was a lot smaller than I thought it would be, but you're right on the ocean. And we ended up staying at an Airbnb, which is where we filmed a lot of those interviews because it was very, very close to absolutely everything. Like you can walk from the Airbnb to all the different places, like where we're going to go diving and where we were going to, film different scenes. And so like it worked out beautiful. But I will say when we got there and that little part of the island, it did seem very separate, like not, I don't want to say separate, but distinguished than every other part of the island because it seemed like a lot more was like a lot more. I don't want to say developed, but there were a lot more activity happening there. There were a lot more restaurants, and there were more things happening there, and you see that the people of the island in that space, like they all knew everyone. Like it's like when you go into a small town and everyone knows everyone's name. You're like, who are these people? Like, how do you guys know everybody? And so it was cool to see that, like, and the fact that not only was that the vibe, but like then it was also like very much like island time. Like everyone was on island time there. And so no matter what, we'll meet you at this time. It was like different timing. So that was also interesting too. But because everyone knew everyone, when we met with Cynthia and Giselle and Danny, they all knew, like almost everyone we bumped into, they knew them personally, right? And we were also with Jenny from Coral, who was like absolutely incredible. So like the first impression of meeting all of them was just like I was blown away because of the hospitality. And I say that to say like, everyone seemed to go out of their way to make us feel like really welcome and tell us about the island and tell us all the cool things and like, oh, you need to try this, you need to try that. I'm like, hey, like we're here to like do make a film. They're like, no, it's okay, we'll do that, but like check this out. And so I would say that is my best way to describe the island. It was very, very comfortable, very welcoming, and the cool thing was to see how many people really, really were passionate about the coral reef, like right away. Like we would see people, talking about it. And then, one of the first days we took the drone up and it was really high. And I didn't expect it to be as massive as it was, but you could see it from the drone, just like how big the coral was. And I was just like, wow, like it's almost like there's two different worlds in the same spot that are just like coexisting. And to me, that was the amazing part of everything because you just see those two worlds collide in like the most beautiful way. And so I would say that is what I would say my first impression of Roatan was.
Yeah, just hearing you talk about it just brings me back. It's such a magical place. And I think our first or second night there, Miss Daney, they had like what do they call it? Hermit crab races. So it's just little things like that that just make that island so special. So yeah, I'm glad you got to experience that. And I'm glad I got to experience that as well. And just knowing how invested they are in the ocean and the coral reefs, it's just second nature to them, and it's beautiful to learn from them. And I love island time. I wish America was on island time, but that's
Yeah. I thought it was even cool too. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like, one more thing I forgot to add. Like, I just remember walking with Giselle when we first met her, and we're talking about something we're gonna do, and she's like listening and she's looking at me, and then like the next thing you know, I see her bending down. I'm like, wait, what's going on? And I just see her picking stuff up. I'm like, what is she picking up? Like, and then she's gathering it. And then she goes in the ocean and she's doing the same thing. I was like, what is that? She's like, oh, it's trash. Like, I just want to make sure it's clean. So I was like, oh my gosh, like that's incredible. Like, and so like I found myself like, okay, if I see trash, I got to pick it up too. So like they just care about the space, the area, and that's amazing.
Yeah. And it makes for a genuine story, right? It's very authentic, and these women really care about where they live and where they're from. It's beautiful. Okay, so we're getting close to Q&A, but we're going to do one more question and then dive into a few things. So give us a big picture view of your perspective of our work, having been to ROTEN, taking a deep dive into wastewater treatment facility, which is shown right here, and documented it for our BBC mini documentary. So what main takeaways or themes are you hoping people glean from the film?
Well, I mean, I love that you asked that, by the way, because when we work on projects like this, one of my favorite things, and one of my main reasons why I still love doing it, is because every time I experience these and help create or help collaborate, is because I feel like I learn something from the people that we interact with. And like I will do that as long as I can, because like I feel like it just enriches so much. And so one of the biggest lessons, or one of the biggest things that I feel like I walked away from with having experienced this, is that this idea that conservation isn't just only about saving the environment, it's about saving ourselves. And while I don't live in Roatan, like I live in Florida, but I still love the ocean, and I have a wife and 2 boys who absolutely love being outdoors and going to the ocean, and literally as much as we can, we're outside. In fact, if I wasn't here right now, I'd probably be outside. But like it just makes me want to hope that when we think about these stories, we take an extra moment to do the little things like pick up trash if we see it outside, because that's where we live, or like pick up trash from the beach, or like maybe something as simple as supporting organizations like the Coral Reef Alliance, right? Because we're taking steps to take care of the world we live in, which I think can ultimately make the world a better place. And that's what I would hope people take away from this, is that not only can you, but you're empowered to be able to change the world for a better place based off of how we can steward the places that we live.
Yeah, Sean, you are so right. Last year we used this line because if reefs go, we go. So it's sobering to know that that's the reality, but that's why our organization has been around for 30 years and counting. And so I love to tell people we will never give up, because if we give up, what does that mean for our future, right? So, and it's also promising to know that this clean water solution exists so that we can replicate this in other coastal communities. It's almost a requirement for the future of our reefs, really. So that's exactly why we created this film with y'all, and that's why we're raising money for the expansion of this work. But we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. We just want to make sure that everyone has time to get their questions in. So if you have a question for Sean, please put it in. There's a little Q&A panel or in the chat. So please get your questions in. And while you're doing that, let's watch some behind the scenes footage of Sean and his team, Jeff and Alex, and many of the others who helped bring this film to life.
It is a beautiful morning, and I am swimming in Half Moon Bay.
I'm just gonna shoot her like a nice morning swim. Yeah, looking down.
Got it. We're here in Roatan, Honduras, and we're working on a production for the Blue Horizon series presented by the Coral Reef Alliance and produced by BBC Storyworks. This production is about the lives of 3 women who are making change on this island as it comes to the way that wastewater is managed to preserve the coral reef surrounding Roatan. As the director, a lot of the things that I was thinking about was making people feel comfortable in their environment. We wanted to approach this film as a way to not invade space, but to become a part of the space and to allow them to be authentically themselves so we can see them and show the world what life is like here in Roatan. I think that's what makes this story different.
When we got here, I really wanted to start taking photos because I could tell there was a story everywhere I looked. I could point at a random sign, a house, a person, and there was a story. And I got really excited to help tell that.
The people of the island of Roatan and Honduras are very kind, very caring about nature, and they do a phenomenal job when it comes to hosting and having people visit the coral reef.
It's truly an honor and a great experience working with incredibly talented producers like Marette with BBC Storyworks. She really found a beautiful way to tie 3 people's individual stories to a larger narrative that's happening right here on the island of Roatan.
We're about to film some beautiful reefs and Cynthia diving. Yes! Very excited.
The reef, as great as it looks up in the air, it looks even better down. Looking in the water is like a whole different world. It's very impressive. Something that was always gonna be in my head. You just want everybody to come down with you and go see it.
There was something about the way Danny was leaning off the edge of the boat so naturally, and I loved that. I loved seeing the joy on her face and feeling the ocean water splash up, and it was kind of hitting my camera, but I was loving it.
What I hope that people take away from this film is a genuine inspiration in the natural resources of their communities, like the oceans and the coral reefs.
Oh my gosh, I love that film so much. All right.
It's so much fun.
So much fun.
I think I need to give another shout out to Jeff because like I was just looking at it and remembering all the photos, like even these photos that are in this presentation, like he took all of them and they're just so great looking. Like it really like makes you miss it and want to go back for sure.
Yeah. Agreed. Completely agreed. Yeah. A funny note, when y'all asked me to do the underwater scenes, well, first of all, I was thrilled. It was just like a chance of a lifetime for me. I was completely speechless. But when I was getting ready to bail off the boat, it's like I completely forgot how to scuba dive. I was so focused on getting the footage. So I bail off the boat, and then I've been diving since I was 15. So to not know how to air up my BCD is just beyond me. I don't even know how that happened, but it was hilarious.
You're focused. You're doing it.
I was channeled into the footage. Okay, so let's get to some questions. All right. Hello from Fort Lauderdale. On the topic of keeping the documentary authentic, how do you approach structuring interview questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's very to keep it authentic. Let me reread the question. So I guess structuring interview questions, it's a lot like, I would say the best way is like to be flexible, right? So obviously we go into it with an idea of what the story is. So we have the questions and that we know, but a lot of it also is like feeding off of the person and seeing where they're going and what they're saying too, right? Because there's follow-up questions that you can ask that can get different things. So it's you structure it in a way that goes towards a direction of the story that we know ahead of time, but then you also kind of leave it a little bit open and be flexible, because sometimes people say things or maybe they're not comfortable in a certain moment. So like you have to kind of reframe and reorient to make people feel really comfortable to be able to answer. But like, honestly, like, Giselle, Cynthia, Danny, they were all incredible. And so it was very easy to kind of interview them and ask them, because we were literally asking about their lives, right? And so we're framing the questions and giving them very specific themes to talk about in our minds before telling them, and it turned out amazing. And again, a lot of the questions and the stories were kind of created ahead of time also with Moret from BBC Storyworks. Like I said, she's absolutely amazing. And so like she had, an idea of storyline and questions she wanted to ask. But a lot of it also is, having that framework, but then being flexible on set when you're there and you're really in front of someone, right? Because you don't want to just sit there like holding an iPad and just be like, okay, what is your name, right? You want to make them feel like they're talking to a person. And so I would say that is almost as important as the questions that you ask.
Yeah, it's that concept of holding it loosely and just kind of letting things unfold. I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got another one. I'm smiling ear to ear watching that clip. So much joy comes through. How do you not be intrusive with all the camera gear? Any pro tips on how to succeed at this?
I have,
I know this too.
I have a, yeah. I don't know if it's a pro tip or not. This is just what I do, and sometimes it helps. So it's like, I do this thing where I try to acknowledge like the elephant in the room all the time. And so one way I do it to call it out is like, I have this phrase that I say to people like, all right, look, like, this is going to feel really, really weird, but it's going to be amazing. And so like, I don't know what it is about that line in that context with the big camera, because like a lot of times people are feeling nervous or they're feeling whatever, but like there's something about it that kind of like helps a little bit. So that's like, I don't know if it's a pro tip, but that's one of the things that we do. In addition to that, like I think it's kind of reading the person a little bit, because sometimes you may need to be more quiet with it. Like you need to be almost like invisible, and you could do that by like putting on a long lens and being far away and having them do something somewhere else and having them talk among themselves. Or like you can do the reverse and like become part of it where you're encouraging them. So it's kind of a case by case thing, but it's with time. I guess that's one of the things that we've learned to do is just reading the people and finding the best way to kind of bring their personality out of the moments.
Yeah, I like what you said about you're just kind of like naming it. Like, this is going to feel weird, but it's going to look great.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, another one. Do you have any advice or recommended resources for someone wanting to build their storytelling skills? Books, courses, documentaries that inspired you?
I would say like, okay, nothing in particular, but just maybe some habits of like reading, writing, and speaking are the three things that I feel like will help that, just depending on the context, right? So if we're talking about storytelling on film, storytelling with photos, storytelling in writing, I would say the best place to start for me, and I'll preface it with a story, right? And so I'm sure everybody can remember COVID in 2020 and how that basically closed a lot of the world and everybody was in their houses. And so during that time, I remember there was about like 2 weeks where we weren't, like, everybody was kind of just on like a mini vacation, right? Which I very much was. So like it was in March and I was like, I live in Orlando, so it's hot outside. I'm like, let's go outside. And my wife, my kids and I, we were outside and swimming in the pool a lot. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. This is like an impromptu vacation. But like a couple days into it, I started feeling like insecure, right? I was like, man, like maybe I should be working on something. I don't know, like maybe I need to be productive. And so one night I was just like, you know what? Like tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be productive. And I set my alarm for 6 o'clock, super ambitious, right? During vacation mode. And my alarm went off and I was like, oh, I don't want to get up. And so I kind of snoozed through a little bit and got up. And after like, at the time I was drinking coffee. I don't drink coffee anymore, but I got some coffee, put it on the table, got my computer down and opened it up and was like, okay, I'm going to be productive. And I opened up like a note and it was blank and it was just like blinking in front of me. And I was like, what am I going to do? I have no idea. And then I just started like looking at old photos of where we used to go, where we used to travel. And I was like, oh man, I missed that. And so then I wrote like, okay, like that was cool. That was a cool memory. And I just wrote that down. And then, oh, that was another cool memory. And so I started creating the start of a story list, right? And so I started realizing that like there's these stories in my life that um, that have happened that I maybe I want to remember, I want to tell, or whatever it was. And then during that time, I started realizing, I started talking to people on Zooms, and people were inviting us to go on podcast. And when they were, and at the time, I was super intimidated by that because we're like, okay, like, um, what are they going to ask me? What am I going to say? And so when people started asking me questions on the podcast, I had all these stories that I was just like writing down, and I was like, oh, maybe I should tell that story. And so the long-winded answer to that question is by starting the habit and developing the habit of making a story list. It allowed me to create this essentially like a little story bank of experiences that I've had that I was able to like start maybe using in the wild, right? And so having a place to test, and you can test like in conversations, you can test maybe, oh, this is a cool story, what would it look like if I try to make it like and change characters. And so the best advice that I would give in telling stories is to try and tell them, right? And if you're looking for other resources, the best resource I would say is maybe look at your own personal experience. But not only that, like you can look at, there's some books out there like, what is it, Donna Miller's Story Brand, and like there's I mean, just watching movies and watching shows and trying to understand what they do is my best advice of what I could do, in addition to maybe creating the habit of maybe trying to tell some of your own stories.
I love that. It's like, practice, 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 kind of like building the ship as you're sailing it. Just what I'm hearing is you just jump in and start doing it. And I think a lot of people have, a little bit of reservation with that because it's scary, right? So yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know that story about your 2020 time. So that's very interesting. I like that. Okay, so we've got another question. Hello from North Carolina. Sean, you have very carefully made a distinction between stewarding stories and telling stories. What does stewarding a story mean to you?
That's a beautiful question. So for me, stewarding stories, I guess in the position that I'm in, it really, like, to me, stewardship in general, that word means to watch over, right? And to like be responsible for. And so I find myself in these circumstances just because of by nature for what we do, that people come to us and they trust us with their stories. So like I have a sense of responsibility to be able to steward over that story, so that we can tell it in a way that does the story justice, it does the organization justice, but most importantly, it does the story justice to the person who's telling it. And so I think stewardship, it really speaks to the relationship that I personally have with stories, because obviously there's so much stuff that we can do, but what's the one thing that we must do? And so for me, like telling stories is the thing that I must do. And so the best way that I found to do that is to take ownership of the stories and kind of like care over them, and that goes into every aspect. And so what that ends up looking like too is, that 7-minute film that you watched, of course, there's like so much footage and so much other like aspects of the story that we didn't tell, but that we're aware of, that we pick and choose what to present. And so I think the idea of stewarding is more speaking to the relationship that we have and how we care and be able to craft the story versus just simply telling it.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Good question, North Carolina. All right, I think we have time for a couple more. So this one comes from Rafael Rivera. Beautiful work. I have a question. How do you manage to do the B-roll? Do you do the interviews first and then you complement with B-roll, character following?
So with that particular, every project is different because of people's availabilities and stuff like that. So my preference is always 100% to do interviews first, because like, or you get, at least you get an idea of what they say. And then also in the interview context for me, it's although we did Zooms and we met each other, that's like a lot of times our first like face-to-face interaction. And so like we're building rapport and we're building all these things. And that's always, for people who haven't been on camera, like it's typically the most like scary thing for them, you know, like, oh my gosh, what are you going to ask me? They're like, how do I look? Like, are there, can you edit me? I'll just edit me. Like, you edit what I say. I didn't say anything good. Like, so there's all these insecurities that they bring. So like for me, doing the interview first allows you to work through those things together with them and guide them through. So by the end of it, they're like, whew, we're ready. Now what? Now the rest is fun. And so that you can basically tell them do anything you want and then they'll do it. And it's great. And so that's where I think the interviews, you know, if we had a choice to do them first, we would do them first all the time because of what that allows. And again, like a lot of the choices that we make when we create these kind of films, as weird as it may sound, we don't necessarily do them for technical reasons. We do them for like, again, stewarding the story, stewarding the moment and allowing people to feel comfortable and, you know, moving in that way.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's do one more question and then we'll wrap up. And thank you for all your questions. If we can get to them behind the scenes, we will. What should be happening in the world right now to ensure we have a healthy planet for future generations? I think that's a really great question from your perspective as a filmmaker, having so many different projects in conservation.
I mean, I think that's a big question. I think it's really great. And so as simple as it sounds, I think it's, again, I don't know what I don't know. I can tell you what I walked away from, right? Because I sometimes for me, it's hard to say like, okay, like this is what people should do. This is what the world should do, right? But I can tell you the two things that I will do having experienced this. And hopefully if you like it, you can do the same thing. But one would be, you know, telling the story, right? Because I genuinely believe, you know, the right story told to the right person has the potential to change the world, right? If not for the whole world, for the one person who needs to hear it at that moment. And so beginning to share these stories in the context that we are, whether it's on social media or whether it's to our neighbor or whether it's on stage or whether it's in a podcast, whether it's in a book, to begin sharing these stories of impact. And two, you know, what's one thing that I can personally do that can kind of move our, you know, our mission forward, right? And so if the mission is conservation, maybe I can, every time I go out, I can look for trash from the ground to pick it up, or maybe I can look for an organization to volunteer, or maybe I can look for an organization to support, like the Coral Reef Alliance, where I can, you know, give my time, my talents, or my resources to a cause that's moving that something that I care deeply about towards. So I would say that's what my hope is for myself that I would like to do. And if, you know, that sounds like something people may want to do, I would encourage them to do that.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. All right. So we've got a few minutes left. I have to wrap up with some technical things, but I just want to say, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. Your input is so valuable, and I'm confident I can speak for everyone when I say this was truly a treat. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it being here, and I'm looking forward to seeing all that you guys do to change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay connected with us because we need you in our corner.
I love it. Well, I'm here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so thank you everyone for tuning in today. Please stay connected with us as well. And as Giselle Brady said in our film, knowledge really can change behavior. So please engage with us on social media. You'd be amazed what a like, a comment, a save, a share can do for the algorithm. It can help our posts reach more people and influence that change for the better. You can also join our alliance by subscribing to our newsletter or by making a donation to our clean water work or just our work in general. For clean water donations, your contribution will go towards connecting another 800 homes to proper wastewater treatment facilities. And it'll keep an additional 49 million gallons of sewage off of the reefs in the community of Cox and Hole on the island of Roatan. And we have more expansion areas, including Key Calker, Belize, and Cozumel, Mexico. So keep an eye on your inbox for a follow-up email with the recording, the links on your screen, and a bonus Clean Water for Reefs toolkit, which will continue to be updated as time goes on. Yeah, and we just appreciate you so much, and we will catch you at the next one. Thank you so much for the support. Oh, I see Jeff's still on. Hey, Jeff. Thanks for coming. Stop sharing now. Awesome.